Hi and welcome to Magic Numbers. This is episode number 90, and today, exciting times. We're having our first dive into the Wilds of Eldraine draft data. But before we go into that, I would like to thank people who are supporting me, and that does include mtgazone.com, and that also does include my patrons. I have two new patrons. There is Control Alt Delete, and there is Diogo Pinto, which is a very special patronage for me, I have to say, and I will spend a minute here because Diogo was the person that, when I started first streaming, he was the person who, basically set me up for everything, gave me some advice how to stream, gave me some ideas of what to do, and was quite important in the early stages of Magic Numbers. I would say fundamental. So I'm super thrilled to see him also as my patron right now. I probably should be patroning towards him rather than him to me, but I'll take it anyway. So thank you very much, Diogo, for your all help, and it's not been forgotten at all. Right. Before we go into the main topic, I would like to start with the preamble. And it's not going to be an uplifting one, although I've tried to make it uplifting. As you probably all know, Sheldon Mannery has passed away after a long illness, and he was a person that is instrumental for Magic as we see it today. And I am not a Commander player. His contribution towards Commander cannot be understated. How Commander Change Limited is also pretty important because our draft chaff is now worth quite a lot sometimes, even though it wouldn't have been if it was only for competitive reasons. But for me, Sheldon is a person. I mean, obviously, I'm not high enough up, and I do not live in the States, so I never bumped into him. He most likely was the head judge on the Pro Tour I played back in the day. But for me, his legacy as a person is that of ruthless dealing with cheaters. As you might know, I started playing in late 90s, and in late 90s, cheating was endemic. And part of why it was endemic was the haplessness of judges in confrontation with cheaters. Cheaters were just blatant, and they just refused to acknowledge what they did, lied their way through it, and judges did not know how to handle that. Sheldon was a key component of changing that. First of all, by talking with people who knew how cheating is happening, figuring out what are the common ways of cheating, and finding solutions to deal with those things, and instructing lower level judges on how to do it. And when I finished playing in 2004, 2005, cheating was still quite a big thing. And then I retired. I came back at Dominaria, and I noticed that the whole thing changed so dramatically. Judges are much better in understanding players. Judges are much better in taking the side of a person who was cheated and not a cheater. Cheaters are ruthlessly eliminated from the environment. Cheaters are ostracized very easily. And this has been such a change for the positive because I spent, well, maybe not weeks, but I spent hours thinking about how my career could have moved if the cheating was not prevalent. Because in the end that how many games that I played were lost because I didn't watch the hands of the person that was playing against me sufficiently. I mean, I literally caught people in their pocket, taking cards out of it in the games with me. And in some cases, it was people that I really knew. And shame to admit, I didn't report a couple of those things because the social stigma would be on me, not on the person that was cheating, and I would be vilified. And I was just a young kid, and I decided not to. But if it was today, I would not have a problem with doing that because right now, community is quite one-sidedly in favor of keeping the game clean, making sure that it's all about playing Magic and not about sleight of hand and blatant cheating. So for that, I'm eternally grateful to Sheldon, who changed this for so much better. And, I want that part of his legacy to be alive. Okay, with that huge D, well, it's not positive, but I hope that we can remember him for the best thing. But with that sad preamble, we can move to maybe happier areas of Wilds of Eldraine data. And we're going to start with the patron question of the week. But this is, I think, a patron question that many people have asked. I got it from a patron who's not a patron, but is much more than a patron, Fake Jake Brown, my fearless podcast uploader. And I can't understate how much Jake is doing for that podcast. So I'm super happy to answer his question. Also, I replied to him already in person, but I will include it in the content because value. So question that he had was, what number should I pick for Talion the Kindly Lord? And just a reminder for you, Talion the Kindly Lord is a 2 blue and a black creature, legendary creature, very noble, a 3/4 with flying. And as Talion the Kindly Lord enters the battlefield, choose a number between 1 and 10. And then, whenever an opponent casts a spell with mana value, power, or toughness equal to the chosen number, that player loses 2 life and you draw a card. So, well, it takes a lot of parameters into account, and we need to figure out which one is the optimal. So I started thinking, okay, which numbers to account for? And there's really 4 numbers that we need to account for: the mana value of the spells, the power of creatures, the toughness of creatures, and also, to some extent, mana value of adventures tagged onto spells, because if you cast the adventure part, that will count as the mana value. So in some cases, by playing Talion, you may stop people from having beneficial adventures on their spells. And that is a small edge to be gained and should be taken into account. But because the adventures can be completely omitted and they can still cast the front face side, I did it in such a way that I looked at mana value, power, and toughness as one category, and mana value, power, toughness, and mana value of adventure as another category. So I added up all the numbers and checked what percentage of cards do have at least one of those numbers. As you will see, if you add up all the bars, they don't add up to 100, they add up to more, because some cards have multiples. Like you have Minstrosity, which has mana value of 2, power of 3, and toughness of 1. So it fulfills all 3 categories in this way. And red bars are counting the adventures in, and blue bars are without the adventures. So independently, whether you look with or without adventures, 2 mana value has the most cards that you will hit. Or number 2 has the most hits. It's 52.5% when you take adventures into account, because quite a lot of adventures have mana value of 2. And it's 46% if you don't count the adventure spell into account. Then second place is 3 with 45.5% with adventures and 43% without adventures, so not a big change. And then there's 1 with roughly 30% with adventures and 25% without adventures. And then we go to 4, that's like 22%, 5 is around 10%, and 6 is around 4%. But okay, this just gives you the rough number of things that you can hit. I would say that if you play Talion, the default number that you should go for is 3. Because the difference between 3 and 2 is small. There is more things with number 2 on it than with number 3. But the things with number 3 will be probably more impactful, because these will be the 3 mana casting mana value spells rather than 2 mana value spells. These are just, because they are more expensive, naturally more powerful. So even though you will get more hits with the number 2, the number 3s are going to be more impactful. So I would default select number 3. Now, this slightly changes if I'm playing some really, really aggressive deck that I see is full of 2 drops. I would probably go for 2. But as a default, I will go for 3. And this is my answer for the question towards the Talion the Kindly Lord. Before we go into actual data, I'm going to talk a bit about early data interpretation. We touched this topic on several occasions, but just said that sample sizes are small, but they are still quite predictive. So I'm going to start with the same thing. Sample sizes are still small. And especially when you look at the archetype-specific data, these can go to like a couple of hundred, maybe 700 to 1,000 games in hand, which is not a lot, which means that there will be slight error on those. And what you see on 17 lands, I know it says win rate, but it's actually not win rate. It's a measurement of a win rate. And the problem with measurements is that every single measurement that we do is burdened by some sort of an error. And question is, how big is this error? And of course, that depends on the sample size. And I did something that I can refresh before every set, and that is calculating the size of the confidence intervals. Confidence intervals are areas from the measurement that you have taken where 95% of the actual average, or 90.5% of the time, the actual average will fall within that range. So if we look at it, it will be dependent on number of games observed. And here, the size of the confidence interval from one side of a win rate. So this is the plus minus percentage points. So if you have 500 measurements, it will be 4.5 percentage points plus or minus. So if you have a card that has a 56% win rate and it's based on 500 measurements for the game in hand win rate, it will be something between 60.5 and 51.5, which is a very wide range. If you go up to 1,000, you drop down to 3.1 percentage points. So if you have a 55% win rate card, it will be something between 52 and 58. And it goes on and on. 10,000 measurements makes the confidence interval of roughly plus minus 1 percentage point. So yeah, again, if you have a 60% win rate card, it will be between 61 and 59, which is, quite acceptable. And this will be like 95% of the times. This is the range when the card will be. And then when we go to like super large sample sizes, 100,000 games at the end of the format, you have 0.3 percentage point difference plus minus. So, 60% win rate card will be somewhere between 59.7 and 60.3. This is just a general guideline. There is more complication coming with those measurements. First of all, we measure in time, and in time the win rate is also going to change. So we are looking at a very good estimation. I think one solution to that is, for example, to keep the sample that you're analyzing as uniform as possible. This is why in week 4, when we're going to look at the data, I usually trim the first 2 weeks, because first 2 weeks are quite chaotic because pick orders change in those first 2 weeks. So I'd rather trim those away and look at weeks 2 onwards to have a win rate, which will be maybe based on a smaller sample, but smaller doesn't mean worse if this smaller sample size is more uniform and more trustworthy. So quality of data also plays into that. And also you have to keep in mind that 95% that the value will fall in that range is neat, but if 5% of the values are outside of the range, that means that in an average set of around 300 cards, you will have 15, on average, you have 15 cards that fall out completely out of those ranges that you would expect, and they are either higher or lower than you would think. So it would be a whole new job to try to estimate those things correctly, and you would need a proper statistician. I am definitely not a proper statistician in order to take all those confusing variables into account. What you can get from that graph is be very careful about analyzing cards that have under 2,000 sample size. And at 10,000, you can more or less estimate that the win rate you're seeing is roughly close to what it really is. But that's about it. Okay. So we can go actually to the proper data. And I wanted to start with the popularity of colors. This is the play rate of colors. I looked at 2-color decks, 3-color decks, monocolor decks, and I calculated what percentage of decks contains particular color. And as you can see, I drew a line here at 20% because that's the expected value. If we had a perfectly balanced format, every color would play 20% of the time. This is not the case. We have 2 colors that are underplayed, white at 17.4% and blue at 14%. Blue quickly identified by the 17 lens user as the weakest of the color, and that sort of seems to be the case. Then we have 3 colors that are overplayed, not by much, because green is at 21.2, Red is at 22.2%, and black is definitely overplayed at 25.2%. So 17 lens users value black, red, and green more than they should on average, and white and blue are undervalued, where blue is quite a lot undervalued. How does it convert to win rates? And we see the win rates are sort of have a similar distribution. So 17 lens users are definitely results driven. The average win rate is 55.8%, and two colors are below that average win rate. Blue at 53.2 is quite a long way below this win rate. When you look at all the decks that contain a particular color, differences should not be large, because decks contain multiple colors. So the blue decks will be dragged up by the fact that other colors are good. So if blue is good 3.5 percentage points below that average, that is a significant result for me. White is at 55, so just below the average by 0.8 percentage points, so slightly subpar. On the other hand, green is slightly above the average. Black is slightly above the average, both of them around 56%, and red is significantly above average at 57.4 percent win rate. So give or take 2 percentage points higher than the average you would expect. Yeah. So first thing you see is that despite black being the most drafted color, it's not the most winning color. Red has that, and again, 1.5 roughly percentage points difference between black and red is not little, especially when you take into account how many people play red-black, where those two colors will have basically parity on the win rate. What also can be seen from the data is that Wilds of Eldraine is a two-color format. It's a two-color format with a slight twist, and that twist is that in an average two-color format, you will get something like 55 to 75% of the decks are going to be straight two colors. And in this format, no, it's only 48%. And 43% of the decks are two colors and splash. But I am convinced, I don't have the strict data to analyze it just yet, but I'm quite convinced that a large chunk of that is because of the splashed adventure cards, the ones that have two colors. And very frequently you will play, and you will maybe have like a crystal grotto that allows you to very rarely play that splashed adventure, but most of the time you're going to play the card that has the adventure on its face value. But of course, 17 lens cannot distinguish between this and splashing, so it will count those decks as decks with splash, and that's why we see that it's 48% of the two-color decks and 43% of the two-color decks with a splash. But that means that 91% of all the decks are decks that are two-colored, so quite a large number. And then we have like 4% of three-color decks and 2.6 of three-colored and splash, and very, very few four-color and five-color decks. However, when we look at the win rate, and that might be, skewed by small sample sizes, but I do see that those four-color and four-color splash decks have an extremely high win rate at 59.7, 59.3. There can be a couple of explanations why that is, because they are the most winning category of decks, even though they only contain like 0.1% of all the data. Well, one is, of course, small sample size. Two is that really good players play those four-color concoctions for some reason. And three, because they are good, and it can be a mixture of all those things. So don't treat it like an advice that you should be drafting multicolor decks, but use it as a guideline that either good players decide to play those decks and have decent results with them, or these decks are just good, and you can play like a green-based deck based on splashing powerful cards from other archetypes. And these will be better. And also, this sort of tells us that looking at three-color and splash decks that have around 52, 54% win rate, so markedly lower, it looks like the fixing in this set is more a fixing for five-color decks than for three-color decks. So if you're going to play a splashy deck, you might as well go all in, because you have mana filtering, you have things that can find any color of mana, and and yeah, they can be pretty good. Having said that, two-color decks are having this roughly average, maybe slightly above average win rate. An interesting part is that two-color decks have a 55.8% win rate, and two-color and splash decks have a 56.4% win rate. And again, this will be maybe caused by the fact that the splashes will mainly be strong, uncommon adventure creatures that can be played without needing to draw the splashed color, which sort of ameliorates for the times when you don't draw the right color to cast the adventure spell. You still have something, and you're not completely left with the dead card in your hand. And monocolor decks are doing well as always at 58, 57%. But of course, you cannot reliably draft monocolor decks in this format. So it will happen sometimes that you will end up in a monocolor deck. Just don't chase it because it's not worth it. Okay. In terms of color pairs popularity ranking, and I'm showing the data that contains both the pure two-color decks and two-color decks with splash. The most popular archetypes are Golgari and Rakdos by quite a lot. So here you can also see that the average should be around 10% because we have 10 color pairs. But both Golgari and Rakdos have slightly above 16% of play rate, which means that those two decks that constitute 20% of the color pairs do constitute 32% of the decks, so almost 1/3. That's way above their weight. This means that 17 Lens users definitely chose Golgari and Rakdos. In fact, I don't think I drafted anything else apart from Golgari so far. I think I had a Selesnya deck once, and I had a Orzhov deck once. I'm yet to draft red on Arena, I think, which I definitely have to change. But so far, I just didn't sit in a pool in the pod where red was even remotely open. But then only two other color combinations are above this 10% threshold. Boros at 11.3 and Gruul just above with 10.2%. And then the other 6 color pairs are below. 3 of them are just slightly below. Orzhov, Dimir, and Selesnya at 9.4, 9.0, and 8.7. Izzet at 7.6, and Simic and Azorius at 5.8 and 5.3. So Simic and Azorius clearly underplayed compared to the average for that would be expected if the set was perfectly balanced. Looking at the win rates, so first of all, we see that those 4 are played more than other things for a good reason. All 4 of the mentioned archetypes that are above average in terms of the rate of play are also above average in terms of the average win rate, which is for the two-color decks 56.1%. And Golgari has 57.6, Rakdos has 58.4, Boros has 58.9, and Gruul has 57.4. So all of them comfortably 1 percentage points, if not more, above the average value. While every single of the 6 decks that are below average played are also below average in terms of win rate, and especially Orzhov and Dimir, which are played almost 10% of the time, only have 53.6, 53.8 win rate, which is, again, 2 percentage points below the average, which is quite a lot. Selesnya and Izzet look slightly better with 55 roughly percent win rate. And then Simic has 53.5, and Azorius is way back at 51.2. So 5 percentage points below the average, which is markedly below. But don't despair. I think that even Azorius is playable in this format. It just probably will require some rethinking how it's being played. Okay, so we will start with colors evaluation when we look at each color, and we will look at the best bombs, top commons, top uncommons for each color, looking at totality of it. And then we're going to look at each archetype, and we're going to evaluate commons and uncommons for that. So we're starting with white. I'm not into changing anything. I like my Wubrick order because I don't have to change the slides. White bombs, the top 3 cards in that category is Virtue of Loyalty, the 5 mana enchantment that at the beginning of your end step, you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control and then untap all of them. And it also has an adventure that is an instant create, a 2/2 white knight creature token with vigilance. Card is obviously absolutely busted. Especially that 5 mana is not so much in limited for that kind of effect. And having the 2/2 that allows you to survive in order to be able to cast this. Also, the fact that the 2/2 you cannot fizzle out like you can do with for example, the Black Virtue. You can remove the target and then the removal spell fizzles and then the Virtue fizzles. That card is just great. Then we have Spellbook Vendor, another amazing 2-drop. That's basically a weird version of Luminarch Aspirant when you think about it. It is not going to make one creature super big. It can put +1/+1 counters on everything that you have, and you need to pay one for every time you do it. But it comes on a better body, a 2/2 vigilance, and also whenever you attack with the creatures that you boosted with the sorcerer rolls, you will get to scry, so you'll get some card selection. And the third bomb that we have is Werewolf's Bodyguard. That's a 1 white elf fox knight. It's a 2/2 with flash. And when it enters the battlefield, exile up to one other target non-fox creature until Werewolf's Bodyguard leaves the battlefield. And you can sacrifice it for 1 and a white, and you gain 2 life. And I see in the chat a question, why is Werewolf's Bodyguard so good? It is just very versatile in terms of how you can use it. It's an instant speed removal, which is not something that is super common. It removes anything, so it can get rid of those big gluttons or some kind of a bomby rare. And late in the game, opponent might be out of removal. It will survive for a long time. On the flip side of it, it also works as the proverbial bodyguard, where it can save your creature. So you can flash it in to stop a removal from resolving. And then you can sacrifice it, gain 2 life, and the creature that it protected returns to the battlefield, where you can maybe even accrue some kind of ETB. Because it's versatile and the effect is powerful, because let's remember how good was a Brutal Cathar in Midnight Hunt Limited, and how good was Annex Sentry in Phyrexia Obi-Wan, and how good almost every single version of that creature was in every format that it was in. This one being so much more flexible pushes it into the 60% plus win rate. And it's not that white doesn't have more good bombs that are in the color combination. Bunnycorn is just out of the top 3, which is a really good card, and there's a couple of others that are really, really strong. Okay. As for top commons in white, these 3 are quite a long way better than anything else. Hopeful Vigil, a 1 and a white enchantment that makes a 2/2 white knight. And when it is put into graveyard from the battlefield, you scry 2, and you can sacrifice it for 3 mana. This is a very flexible piece. First of all, it's just a 2/2 vigilance for 2 mana, but there's synergies for it. You can bargain away the Hopeful Vigil later to get extra effect. You can return to your hand with the Stockpile Celebrant and replay it to get another 2/2. So there's plenty of additional uses for that card. And it's just super flexible. Cooped Up is finally what I wanted always to see in the pacifism effect. For 2 mana, you can get the pacifism, like straight vanilla pacifism, which is great. But of course, the problem is that some creatures you just can't keep on table because they are doing their thing anyway under the pacifism, and that makes pacifism effects really bad. So Cooped Up has a slight upgrade. For 3 mana, you can exile the enchanted creature. And this also means that you can do some little mini combos with it. You can put the effect on the stack and then bargain Cooped Up away to get extra value. So it's just like cute fringe uses that will require you to push the full control button on your arena client. Yes, MP from Germany. That's a cheaper Dreadful Apathy. And I think that 1 mana cheaper is exactly what that card needed. I think it's pretty good in this format. And the last card that is in top commons, but might be surprising to some, but it will definitely not be surprising to the others, is Archon's Glory, a 1-mana instant that has bargain, which is important because there are some things in white that you really want to bargain away. Not only that you want to get the bargain effect, but you actively want to bargain things, and white only has 2 spells with bargain, so that's a very important spell from that perspective. It's a combat trick where target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. However, if you bargained it, that creature also gains flying and lifelink until end of turn, which is a huge difference from how the card operates. Giving something +2/+2 is nice to save a creature from like a direct damage spell, but giving it +2/+2 and flying on top of that, and lifelink. So you play it on a 2/2, and that 2/2 swings for 4, gains you 4 life. That's a massive swing in a racing situation. This completely flips the game. And if you can combine it with sacrificing Hopeful Vigil or something else that we're going to see on the next slide, this is absolutely phenomenal. Did I mention? The Princess Takes Flight, the top white uncommon by a lot. So if I remember correctly, Princess Takes Flight has around 59.5% win rate. Cheeky House Mouse is at 56. White uncommons is where the colors suffers, and that's probably one of the reasons why white is not close to in power level to black, green, and red. Princess Takes Flight is a 3-mana saga. Chapter 1, you exile a creature. Chapter 3, target creature you control gets +2/+2 and flying until end of turn, so like a nice boost in terms of attacking. And Chapter 3 is return the exiled card to the battlefield under its owner's control. So obviously, you don't want that saga to trigger Chapter number 3, and the easiest way of not doing it is to bargain it away. And that's why Archon's Glory is so good, because you can just play it, sacrifice the Princess Takes Flight, and swing for additional damage with flying and lifelink. So if you had 2 creatures on board at the turn that Princess Takes Flight triggers the second chapter, you can give +2/+2 and flying to 1 creature, +2/+2 flying lifelink to the other, sacrifice Princess Takes Flight. The creature that was exiled with Princess Takes Flight will never come back. So fantastic way of swinging the game completely. The other 2 uncommons that are on the list is a Cheeky House Mouse, a 1-mana 2/1 that also has a squeak by 1-mana sorcery adventure. Target creature you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn, and it can't be blocked by big creatures with power 3 or greater. And Glass Casket is a similar type of effect than Princess Takes Flight. It's an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, exile target creature and opponent controls with mana value 3 or less until Glass Casket leaves the battlefield. So here, if you sacrifice Glass Casket, you don't get the value of permanently removing that creature. It will come back. So be careful while using it. Still good enough to be a number 3 white uncommon. In case of blue, the biggest bombs, and only 3 bombs, these are head and shoulder above any other card in the set. And I think that these 3 cards should be the only ones in blue that can be considered reasons to draft blue. First is Talion's Messenger, that's a 3-mana, 1/3 flying fairy noble. When you attack with 1 or more fairies, draw a card, then discard a card. When you discard a card this way, put a +1/+1 counter on target fairy you control. So good in its own, because it will start attacking eventually and drawing you looting cards and growing. But it's even better if you already have a fairy on board that can attack when you play it. So you cast Talion on the turn, then you attack with the fairy, you loot, and you can put a +1/+1 counter on Talion or on this fairy, depending on what you prefer. So for example, I played Talion's Messenger, and I cast it when my red opponent was tapped out. I instantly put a counter on Talion's Messenger to get it out of range for Torch the Tower. And then I started putting extra counters on Talion still, because every counter removes 1 potential removal that will be able to kill it. Then we have Hornlog Whale. That's a 6-mana 6/6 with Flash Ward 2, and it enters the battlefield tapped unless it's your turn. And it has an adventure instant, Lagoon Breach. The owner of target attacking creature you don't control puts it on the top or bottom of their library they choose, basically. But for 2 mana, bouncing something and removing a draw step from your opponent is a really strong ability, which is a good step towards being able to cast the 6 mana 6/6. And of course, because it has flash, you can play it in 2 ways. If you have like counter spells or something, you can just basically leave your mana open, and if they don't play anything that you want to counter, you just flash in the Horned Lockwhale. But if you need a defender or a blocker on your turn, you just play it on your turn for 6. It comes untapped, and then you can block. And but you tapped out, and you cannot counter whatever comes next. So sort of dual functionality depending on how instant reliant you are and what is in your hand. And one that is a slight surprise, I think, a Sleep Cursed Fairy, 1 mana creature fairy wizard. It has flying, ward 2, and there's the 3/3 for 1 mana, but it enters the battlefield tapped with 3 stun counters on it. And you can pay 1 and a blue to untap it. And if it has stun counters, instead of untapping it, it will remove a stun counter from it. So you can play it very early and then just leave it behind and sort of like suspend creature, and it will eventually untap and be a threat. But also, even if it's on the battlefield tap, you get some fairy synergies. So your counter spell becomes better, the one that counts fairies. You can cast fencing fairies or fairy fencing for the bonus. So there is a plenty of stuff on it. Yeah, and the word 2, as the chat notices, it's a pretty oppressive thing on it, because not so many things will kill it with good mana efficiency. But apart from those 3, all the other blue rares are mediocre, at least in terms of win rates on 17 lands. Top commons in blue, and this was a bit of a surprise to me. The top common is Into the Fey Court. It's a 3 blue for sorcery, draw 3 cards, create a 1/1 blue fairy creature token with flying, and this creature can only block creatures with flying. I knew that the card is going to be okay, but I didn't expect it to be that good. 5 mana spell being a top common is not something that happens very frequently. So I would draw your attention to this card and play it more frequently. I think especially blue green wants to have a copy or even 2 of that card, because it puts you into the game that you want to be playing, where you have the top end and you have resources, and then you have more cards, and then it will just spin out of control. I think that potentially in the blue-green deck, it's better than the Up the Beanstalk, the 2 mana enchantment that draws cards when you cast 5 mana spells. Second one is Spell Stutter. The 1 and a blue instant counter target spell unless its controller pays 2, plus an additional 1 for each fairy you control. So most of the time 2, but sometimes 3, maybe even 4. Really good counter spell. Games in this format are really close, and you have to be playing efficiently with your mana. So Spell Stutter will find targets quite late into the game, especially when you're playing some fairies, and it will turn pay 2 into a mana leak. It's going to be significantly better into significantly later in the game. And the third one is Johann's Stopgap. 3 and a blue for a sorcery. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, draw a card. But if you bargain it, it costs 2 less. So you get a 2 mana bounce something, draw a card. Again, this card is a type of a card that will be undervalued by arena users a lot. It is a sorcery, but the effect is still good enough, and you can play this game when you out-tempo your opponent. So, for example, imagine you play turn 1 Sleep Cursed Fairy, and then you counter something with Spell Starter, you bounce something with Johann's Stopgap, and all of a sudden opponent is like 5 turns in and they didn't deal you that much damage, and now your Sleep Cursed Fairy is untapped and you can start dealing damage. That's the kind of a game that you probably want to be playing in at least some amount of the blue decks, I think, including blue-red and blue-black. Top uncommons, and here we have the first appearance of the card from the additional sheet from the Enchanted Tales. and it's Hatching Plants, 1 and a blue for an enchantment. When Hatching Plants is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, draw 3 cards. So literally 2 mana do nothing unless you are capable of sacrificing it. Luckily, we have Bargain in the set, so you can sacrifice this in some way, and that's still good enough to be a top blue uncommon. The one that surprised me, number 2, is Picklock Prankster, a 2 mana fairy rogue with flying and vigilance. It's a 1/3. And it has free defay, 1 in a blue, instant adventure. You mill 4 cards, and then you can put an instant sorcery or fairy card from among the milled cards into your hand. I did some calculations on it, and I think that you want to have 10 targets for it in your last 30 cards, which would mean that probably in your deck you might want to have like 12 targets for it in total, in order for that to hit with the frequency that is good enough for me. In some cases, you're going to play it as a 2 mana 1/3 flyer with vigilance. In some cases, when you draw it later, you might punt for the free defay and then play it as a creature. So you got like a 2 mana 4 mana 1/3 flying vigilance, draw a card. Now, important part is that it does take fairies into your deck. So it will basically 4 types of cards it can return to your hand: instant, sorcery, fairy creatures, and Bitter Blossom for some reason. So if you have Bitter Blossom in your deck, that's a good way for tutoring for Bitter Blossom. Don't forget about it, as Bitter Blossom has a tribal fairy, a type of the enchantment. And the last card on the list, and also at much lower win rate if I remember correctly, is Bitter Chill, the 1 in the blue aura. When it enters the battlefield, you tap the enchanted creature, and it doesn't untap until during its controller's untap step. And when Bitter Chill is put into a graveyard from battlefield, you may pay 1. If you do, scry 1 and then draw. So a removal, if opponent is capable of dealing with it, you will, if you keep 1 mana up at some stage of the game, be able to scry 1 and draw a card, which is not a bad fail state. Still, it has the same problem as all the pacifism effects do. It keeps the thing on the battlefield, and if that thing generates value, you don't gain that much from Bitter Chill. So imagine, for example, putting Bitter Chill on the Spellbook Vendor. And yes, opponent lost a 2 to Vigilance creature, but they still can pay 1 every single turn to create a sorcerer role and attach it to something, which is not exactly a way of dealing with the creature permanently. So yeah. So there is a discussion in the chat about the Johann stopgap. The draw a card, adding draw a card to that effect is big difference. Bouncing a spell for 2 mana is not a really good thing because you spend a card to deal with something that's not permanent. Using 4 mana to bounce something and draw a card means that you bounce something that they had, but you are regaining the resources that you used in terms of the cards at least. So that's a big difference, the draw a card part on it, and that shouldn't be understated how important that is. Okay, black bombs. Top 1 is Virtue of Persistence. 5 black for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. But it also has a sorcery for 1 and a black. Target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn. You gain 2 life. The card is just absolutely broken. 2 mana, very efficient removal. And then later in the game, if you manage to get there, which you should by killing something big and gaining 2 life, then you get this enchantment that should be the end of the game, because every turn you can basically reanimate something from your graveyard. If you untap with it, that should be it. Number 2 in terms of black bombs is Lord Skitter, the Sewer King. It's a 3 mana legendary creature, Rat Noble. Whenever another rat enters the battlefield under your control, exile up to 1 target card from an opponent's graveyard. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a rat. So basically, it's a rat generator. Every single turn it makes a 1/1, including if you played it before. Your attack phase, you will generate the rat already on the first turn. So it comes into play sort of as a 3/3 with a 1/1, which is an insane rate. Also, randomly just destroys opponent's graveyard, which is nice. 3/3 for 3 is already a decent stat line. So the card is just a primary target of removal. And if something is a primary target for removal and still leave something behind and make something in the process, that's usually a sign of a great card. Then there is Gumdrop Poisoner, a 3-mana creature. It's a 3/2 with lifelink. And when it ETBs, up to one target creature gets -X until end of turn, where X is the amount of life that you gain this turn. And it has an instant adventure, Tempt with Treats. And that's a 1 black instant, create a food token. So the play pattern can be you create the food on turn 1, then you play the game, and at turn 5, you can sacrifice that food, gain 3 life, play Gumdrop Poisoner, and something will get -3/-3. It's just a phenomenal card. And I just realized that in my pre-release, I had Virtue of Persistent, Lord Skitter, and Gumdrop Poisoner as my 3 black cards that I opened in terms of rares. So that does explain why I trophied that pre-release. I just, including, I played 2 different decks. One was like a blue-black that had all of those, and the other one was just a green-white, but I splashed for Virtue, Lord Skitter, and Gumdrop Poisoner. So clearly, I understood that these cards will be good. As a side note to Gumdrop Poisoner, I thought that a very cute combo that it has is playing the card that will be played in Modern. What's the name of it? Not Dead After All, is it? Not Dead After All. Yeah, that's the one. Where you basically, until end of turn, target creature you control gains. When this creature dies, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner control, then create a Wicked Roll token attached to it. Because what you can do is, after you play the Gumdrop Poisoner for the first time, you can attack with it. If it gets blocked, which very frequently it will, because no one likes to let a 3/2 lifelinker connecting too frequently, you can play Not Dead After All on it, and then it dies, comes back, and you gain 3 life from the lifelink part. So it will give -3/-3 to something one more time. So I thought that this is a cute mini combo with the card that you can easily get when you get the Gumdrop Poisoner. Top commons in black, and we're talking Candy Grapple. That's 2 mana instant with bargain. Target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn, and if it was bargained, it's -5/-5. Super efficient removal. We knew that it's going to be good, and it's great. But I was absolutely mind-boggled how close those 3 cards are between. They are within 5 percentage points from each other. So second card is Rat Out. Instant for black. Up to 1 target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn, and you create a 1/1 black rat creature token with this creature can't block. I think that this card is excellent because of how close powers and toughness of creatures in this format are. And I found it so frequently that I'm just like jamming with multiple creatures. And if there is one block where it slightly misaligns, I can rat out and swing it in my favor. And at the same time, getting a 1/1 rat that is both a potential attacker and a potential bargain fodder is just very useful. So I was very positively surprised by how well Rat Out plays. I happily played 2 in my last deck, and they were both great. And the third one is Hopeless Nightmare, black for an enchantment. When it ETBs, each opponent discards a card and loses 2 life. And when it's put into graveyard from the battlefield, you scry 2, and then you can sack it for 3 mana, very much like Hopeful Vigil in white. So basically the same card, but instead of making a 2/2 Vigilant Knight, you make an opponent discard a card and ping them for 2. Great cards. Hopeless Nightmare does require certain builds, I guess, but so it won't be great in every single black archetype, but it will be good in surprising amounts of them. So keep an eye out on this card. It's probably possible that Nightmare is better than Rat Out. Also, Rat Out, people are going to learn how to play around it much better in the future, I'm pretty sure. Still, you can't ignore the fact that they have basically the same win rate. And in terms of uncommons, well, I would like to also draw your attention to the fact that the average casting cost, the mana value of top black commons is 1.33. So cheap cards matter in this format, it seems, and they are less replaceable. In terms of the top black uncommons, the top one is Witch's Vanity, 2 mana for a saga. Chapter 1, destroy target creature and opponent controls with mana value 2 or less. You'll almost always find a target for that, and if not, then you're probably winning that game. Chapter 2 is create a food token, and Chapter 3 is create a wicked roll token attached to target creature you control. It's a lot of things for 2 mana, including you can kill some obnoxious creatures. Like the best possible scenario is probably killing the Goose Mother with it, but there are plenty of other really strong targets that you can kill with it. And number 2 black uncommon is Lord Skitter's Butcher. When it enters the battlefield, you can choose one. You can either make a rat, you may sacrifice a creature if you do scry 2 and draw a card, or you can give your creatures menace until end of turn. So like lots of possibilities, and each of them will be strong in a different way. So a rat will be good if you're building a wide board and you have maybe some rat synergies. Drawing a card is good when you're behind and you need extra value. And you maybe sacrifice a different rat that you couldn't block with anyway, and scry 2 and draw a card. And getting menace might be a way of enabling lethal damage. So yeah, it's amazing how flexible this card is, and still comes on a really solid body, 2/3. I think 2/3 is a very underestimated stat line, as you will see in red cards, I think. Fairy Dream Thief, 1 mana for a 1/1 flying fairy. When it enters the battlefield, you surveil 1, and that can be quite cute with some interactions. And for 3 mana, you can exile it from your graveyard, and you draw a card and lose 1 life. So basically, if you cast it early, it's a 1/1 that can do some chip damage with flying, so probably even 4. If you are playing a card like Curiosity, which I think that you might be playing in fairy decks, you might get a very early attacker that draws you cards that opponent has to deal with, and most likely will have to use an over-the-top removal to get rid of it. And even if they do, you can still, at some stage of the game, exile it, draw a card, which is great. Red, in terms of bombs, we have Red Cup Gutter Dweller. That card is insane. 4 mana for a Goblin Warrior, a 3/3 only. But it comes with 2 1/1 black rat creature tokens with this creature cannot block. It has menace. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you may sacrifice another creature. So maybe a rat that you just produced. And then you put a +1/+1 counter on Red Cup Gutter Dweller and exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. So it's a card drawing engine, a very dangerous threat at some stage of the game. If they kill it instantly, which is a problem with creatures like that, you still get 2 1/1s left behind. So no, not such a big loss. A fantastic creature. Number 2 is a bit of a surprise maybe for some of you, Goblin Bombardment. And some people think, oh, that's just a build around, but it seems like it's generally a really good card, probably especially in Rakdos, because if you have Totentans and Goblin Bombardment, you just basically killed your opponent, because every creature that you sacrifice that is not a token will create a token that you can also sacrifice. So with Totentans on board, you can probably very quickly deal 9-10 damage with Goblin Bombardment for 2 mana. It enables all the acts of treason, which is rarity in this format. And Act of Treason is good without the sacrifice outlets in this format. So the fact that it gives you that sacrifice outlet is just amazing. And generally a good finisher. That card is probably going to be underappreciated, but treated as one of the top bombs. Think that it has a higher win rate than Realm Scorcher Hellkite, which is a 4 red dragon. It's a 4/6 haste flyer with bargain, and when you bargain it, you get 4 mana of any color combination, and it has 1 in red. It pings something for 1, something, or player or creature or planeswalker, whatever, something. So that's like a super strong card, and still Goblin Bombardment has a slightly higher win rate than that. Top commons, Torch the Tower by quite a far margin. It's an excellent card. 1 red for a deal 2 damage to target creature or planeswalker, and exile it. But if you bargain it, instead it deals 3 damage, and you also get the scry 1. So phenomenal. That effect, 3 damage, and scry 1 costs 2 mana normally. Here you get it for 1. If you have bargain targets, it's going to be great. Top common of the whole format, so no surprise there. Number 2 red common is Cut In. 4 mana for deal 4 to target creature. Also, you create a Young Hero Roll token attached to up to 1 target creature you control. Young Hero Roll, again, excellent with things like 2/1 first strike creature that is in the set and is also one of the top red commons. Great with Gingerbrute that lets you get unblockability of some sort. Great with a lot of things. Something that has flying. So there's plenty of good targets for cut in. And 4 damage for 4 seems like it's just good enough. And the third common, Flick a Coin, deals 1 damage to any target. You create a treasure token and draw a card. Does a lot and punishes quite a lot of cards. I played the card and in paper, and it was excellent. Because I never played red in Arena, but in paper, obviously, I ended up with a Gruul deck, and Flick a Coin was such a beating when I played it a couple of times. And especially to draw a card and creating a treasure in my deck that didn't have that many ways of generating bargain fodder. And I was also splashing quite greedily the Goose Mother in a Gruul deck without other ways of fixing, so that treasure was super valuable for me. Excellent card in that situation, and I think that it punishes just enough in order to be a very playable card. Also, in some decks, you can remove like something that was bothering you, like a monstrosity, quite early, and at the same time, this ramps you into 5 mana, which is great. And I think that, weirdly enough, red-green is actually the 5 mana deck, not green-blue. Top uncommons, Witchstalker Frenzy card is insane. It's 3 and a red for an instant. It costs 1 less to cast for each creature that attacked this turn, and it deals 5 damage to target creature. So if you attack with 2 creatures, you just have 2 mana, deal 5. If opponent attacks you with 3 creatures, you have a 1 mana, deal 5. So good on offense, good on defense, just phenomenal card. And it's quite obvious that it's phenomenal, so probably most people evaluated it as such. However, Monstrous Rage was not maybe such an obvious choice for a great card. Red, for an instant, target creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn, and you create a monster roll token attached to it. So basically gives +3/+1 and trample, and +1/+1 of those +3/+1 stays permanently on the creature. Really good in very aggressive decks in Boros. I've seen it wreak havoc when Corticals was playing it in his drafts. So don't sleep on this card. It's a bomb. Bomby uncommon. It's not a bomb, but it's really strong, and I still see them going quite late. And third is a bit of a surprise, Twisted Fealty. Mind you, smaller sample size than the other cards, but it's good not only in red-black, it's good in other archetypes, which means to me that just the effect of stealing something and attacking with it is good in this thing. And also the fact that it creates this wicked roll attached to up to 1 target creature, which will deal 1 damage probably on the turn it's being played, and potentially 1 damage later when that creature is going to die, is not nothing. So it can be sort of counted as sort of steal a creature, deal 2, which is a good rate for that kind of spell. And green, the bombs. You would be shocked, but Graph Triplets made to the list of green bombs. 3 green, Satyr Warrior. It's a 3/3 for 6 mana, so clearly not good. Or it would be not good if not for the fact that it has trample. Wait, actually, that doesn't make it that much better. So no, the second ability. When it enters the battlefield, if it isn't a token, create 2 tokens that are copies of it. So it basically enters the battlefield as 3 3/3s with trample. But wait, there's more. You think that this is enough, and in my head it would be. But no, when it dies, put a number of +1/+1 counters equal to its power on each creature you control named Graph Triplets. So one of those triplets dies, the other ones get +3/+3. One of those triplets dies when it was slightly bigger, they get slightly more. Needless to say that you can also bargain away the token versions of them. So you can attack with all 3 of them, and if one of them is blocked weirdly, you can just sacrifice it to some kind of bargain effect, and the other 2 will automatically get +3/+3. It's just insane. I played with the card in my paper draft on the FNM, and every time it hit the battlefield, it was just a quick scoop. But okay, enough. This is the most high win rate card of the set so far, and the fact that it's on rarity is going to be annoying. I already felt it yesterday playing a draft on Arena when I had a really good deck, but just I was paired with 2 decks that had Gruff triplets, and I only went 4-3 with my what I thought pretty solid deck that was based on commons and uncommons. So unfortunately, I think that this at rare is a bit annoying. It could have been a mythic easily, and it wouldn't make a big difference in constructed formats, but it would make limited slightly more playable, I think. Huntsman Redemption is the number 2 green bomb. It's a saga, 3 mana. Chapter 1, you make a 3/3. Chapter 2, you may sacrifice a creature. If you do, search your library for a creature or a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. So basically, you can suck some small creature to tutor for a bigger thing. And chapter 3, up to 2 target creatures get each +2/+2 and trample until end of turn. So like a mini overrun. It's a really good value because 3 mana for a 3/3 is just good, and all the other effects are really, really strong. And the last one, which is slightly surprising to me, Feral Encounter. Green for a sorcery. Look at top 5 cards of your library. You may exile a creature card from among them, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order, and you may cast the exiled card this turn, and the Feral Encounter creates a delayed trigger. So beginning of your next combat phase, this turn, target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to up to 1 target creature you don't control. And I assume it works like this, that you can cast Feral Encounter, find a creature, play it, then declare attackers, then it triggers the delayed trigger, and then the creature that you played can also deal damage via Feral Encounter, but you can also use any other creature that you already had on board to deal some damage to a target. But I think that the important part is that you pick a target not when you cast Feral Encounter, but when you declare your next attackers. And still, surprisingly, it's a very strong card, because that's just basically a mixture of Commune with Nature and Rabid Bite. But combine 2 cards in one, and all of a sudden you get something that has a really high win rate. Then, in terms of top commons, number 1 is Hamlet Glutton. 7 mana for a 6/6 Trampler, and when it ETBs, you gain 3 life, but it has Bargain that can discount it by 2, which means it will become a 5 mana 6/6. This is like the card that defines green, I think, in this format. It's really all about, when you play green, it's all about when is the Hamlet Glutton going to appear on my opponent's side when they play green. And surely it does, and sometimes in pairs, and that's really annoying to deal with in a set that doesn't have that much of conditional, unconditional removal. Number 2 was a bit surprising to me, Leaping Ambush. I always like this type of cards. Sudden Spinnerets was my favorite card, one of my favorite cards in Ikoria. Leaping Ambush is similar. It's an instant for a green. Target creature gets +1/+3 and reach until end of turn, and tap it. So it's literally an ambush. You attacked with something, opponent attacks you back, you play Leaping Ambush, huge back boost for the creature, reach, so you can actually deal with flying creatures quite efficiently, and just a small boost in power just to make sure that you will be able to kill. It looks like, I looked at that card, and every single archetype, it was pretty impressive. So I would draw your attention to it and maybe think about playing it more frequently than you do. And number 3 green common is Hollow Scavenger. 3 mana for a 3/2. You can sacrifice food to give it +2/+2 until end of turn, activate only once each turn. And it has an adventure, Bakery Raid, green for creating a food token. So it sort of fuels itself at least once. A very solid creature that has a very important role to play in black-green, for example. And top uncommons in green, Tough Cookie is absolutely insane for an uncommon discard. 1 in the green for a 2/2 artifact food golem. And when it ETBs, you create another food, and then you can pay 2 in a green to turn target non-creature artifact you control into a 4/4 creature until end of turn. And of course, you can 2-tap it, sacrifice it to gain 3 life, because it's still a food. Only you can't do it any time like you can do with food, because Summon in Sickness applies to this particular type of food, which was a bit counterintuitive to me when I first realized, oh, I can't just sack it instantly. But you can't. But the play pattern with it is that you play it, you make the food, and at some stage you can just pay 3 mana to make that food into a 4/4 and start jamming, and then opponent realizes that they had to kill the tough cookie very early, because otherwise it gets out of control quickly, especially if you have multiple foods and you can just chuck them and force opponent to trade. And the second uncommon is Welcome to Sweet Tooth. 1 in a green saga, create a 1/1 white human creature token. Is the first chapter. Second chapter is you make a food. And third chapter is you put X +1/+1 counters on target creatures you control, where X is 1 plus the number of foods you control. So you basically slow roll a 3/3, but potentially you can make something bigger. I had turn 2 Sweet Tooth that gave 4 +1/+1 counter on the third chapter, and that's becoming really strong because you can go food, Sweet Tooth, tough cookie or something, and all of a sudden that human becomes like a 5/5 or a 6/6, which is a real. And the last one is Royal Treatment. That card is flying a bit under the radar in terms of 17 lands ALSA, so it goes quite late in the draft still, but has as good numbers as Tough Cookie and Welcome to Sweet Tooth. Single green for instant. Target creature you control gains hexproof until end of turn. Create a royal roll token attached to that creature, so it gets +1/+1 permanently and ward 1. Really great trick. You can do a lot of it. We know that these kind of cards are strong. I think that my listeners will, most of them, know how good this card is. I'm just here to confirm that data confirms what we knew about those hexproof 1 mana tricks. They are so good when they cost 1 mana, and Royal Treatment is not an exception. Okay, now we can move to the archetype specific data, and for each archetype I'm going to look at key commons and key uncommons, and I'm going to look at the best common for each color combination. I'm going to look at the hidden gem, which is a card that either goes later in the draft and has a high win rate, or a card that maybe is played less frequently, or maybe both of those things. And for each archetype, I'm also going to look at a trap. And the trap might be a card that is picked highly but has a low win rate, or it might be a card that looks like it fits perfectly in a certain archetype but has a surprisingly low win rate. So maybe there's something that it just misplays with how the format developed. We start with Azorius, and the best common for Azorius is Armory Mice, 1 in the white for a 3/1, and Armory Mice gets +0/+2 as long as 2 or more non-land permanents enter the battlefield under your control this turn, has a win rate of around 58%. Game and hand win rate of around 58%. And that was a big surprise to me. But it also is something that gives me the impression that white-blue you want to play really cheap aggressive creatures and then control the board by tapping or whatnot. And Armory Mice has 3 attack and 1 defense, which is just good enough for that kind of an aggressive creature. And also, sometimes you'll be able to make 2 permanents enter the battlefield, becomes a 3/3. So there is slight bonus from that. In terms of a hidden gem, Sleight of Hand, blue for a sorcery. Look at top 2 cards of your library, put one of them in your hand and the other one at the bottom of your library. Surprisingly high win rate of 56.4 based on the small sample size, but this is a card you can easily get in every draft. And if you end up on Azorius by some chance, remember the weakest of the archetypes, you might at least experiment playing with the card and seeing what's going on with that. I still don't know. I never played it, so it's hard for me to conceptualize. But but it looks like it has pretty decent numbers. What I marked as a trap is Rhyme for Reindeer. It's 3 and a white for a 3/4 elk. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, tap target creature an opponent controls. And it looks like it's a tap kind of archetype creature because it taps things, but it actually has a very weak 49% win rate. So it seems it does the tapping not in the way that you want to achieve. So think carefully about playing Rhyme for Reindeer. Most likely it's just that there is not enough enchantment synergies that you want to be playing in this type of a deck to make sure that Rhyme for Reindeer is actually strong. In terms of key uncommons, the best uncommon for the archetype is Charade of Numbing Depth. That's the signpost, 2 white and blue for a creature, 2/3. When it enters the battlefield, tap target creature an opponent controls and put a stun counter on it. And whenever you tap one or more untapped creatures your opponent controls, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. So basically, often it will be 2 white, blue, play it, tap something, draw a card. It also has a stun counter. So 59.25% win rate for that card. That's really strong for that archetype. It's by far the best card, and probably like without Charade and maybe 2 of those, I wouldn't even start thinking about going into the archetype unless I got like one of the mythic things that are amazing for white blue. Hidden gem, but quite a long way behind Charade, is the Picklock Prankster, 1 and a blue for a fairy rogue, 1/3 flying vigilance. We talked about the card earlier in the top blue uncommons, and it's partially a top blue uncommon because it's also good in Azorius. Also has the mill 4 cards, put an instant sorcery or fairy card from among the milled cards into your hand. So as I said, in order for that card to be good, you need probably around 10 targets for it in your last 30 cards, so around 12 cards in your deck. The trap card is Stroke of Midnight, 2 and a white for an instant, destroy target non-land permanent. Its controller creates a 1/1 white human creature token, only 47% win rate. And this card is performing badly across other archetypes as well, which makes me think, I was hoping that maybe finally we get a sort of Raven form that will be playable, but it seems Stroke of Midnight is still not good enough. I think that in too many decks, killing a 2/2 to make a 1/1 is just not good enough a deal. And it will be great against some matchups when you can convert Hamlet Glutton into a 1/1, but in many other matchups, it's just going to be not impactful enough. So yeah, I think that, you can think of it as a sort of sideboard. I think that the Thunderwunk has one good point. You don't need to kill their stuff, just tap it. But I think that you cannot tap everything. You just need to keep the one creature for tapping purposes on board. So you will have to do some amount of killing of their creatures. It's just that Stroke of Midnight ain't that thing. When you think about it, you kill their thing, you make a 1/1, you can tap the 1/1 if you need to tap things. So that's perfectly fine with that play pattern. And still, it's not good enough. Key commons in white-black. The best common is Hopeless Nightmare, and at 58.3%, compared to the top uncommon, to top common in blue-white. That's actually close. But other commons in white-black are closer to Hopeless Nightmare than they were in Azorius. Hidden Gem, I selected the Stockpiling Celebrant. It performs particularly good in that archetype, being the second most powerful common, 57.6% win rate. It just combos with both Hopeless Nightmare and the Vigil that makes a 2/2 Vigilance creature. All of those cards are great in this archetype, and that's like one mini package that you have in it. You play Hopeless Nightmare, you play Vigil, and then you play Stockpiling Celebrant, return one of those cards to your hand, scry it, and then you recast it, and then you can start bargaining with them and scrying even more. So you get like a good card selection, and it's a sort of grindy nickel and dime kind of gameplay style. Trap for this archetype, I selected Fell Horseman. The card is picked relatively high, but has a win rate of only 50.9%. That's a 4 mana 3/3. When it dies, put it on the bottom of its own library, and has an adventure, Deathly Ride, which is 2 mana Raise Dead. Basically, you return a creature from your graveyard to your hand. It's just not good enough, and it's picked quite highly because people seem to like this kind of sort of 6 mana Gravedigger vibe. In terms of the key uncommons, best uncommon for the archetype, and that was absolutely surprised, was Woodland Acolyte. That's 2 and a white for a 2/2 human cleric. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. It has a green, yes, you heard me right, green adventure, Mend the Wilds. It's an instant. Put target permanent card from your graveyard on top of your library. And it has almost 60% win rate in this archetype, even though it's green. But we were talking about how frequently people splash in this format, and I think that splashing green in those white-black decks is not a bad idea, and that's reflected by Woodland Acolyte being here. You can play it just as a vanilla 2 to draw a card, but I think that you realistically want to have Mend the Wilds. And What is good in the Woodland Acolyte in this particular deck is that you have a lot of those small permanents that you sacrifice, including Hopeless Nightmare, including the Hopeful Vigil, and having access to those cards that you can easily get into the graveyard is nice. And splashing is super easy with one forest, Evolving Wilds, and Crystal Grotto. You're all set for playing Woodland Acolyte because you're not ashamed of playing it, even if you don't have green. Yeah, Mike. Princess Takes Flight is also one of those cards that will frequently end up in your graveyard, and Woodland Acolyte can return them. Why do I mention Princess Takes Flight, do you think? You might ask if you are listening to this as a podcast, because this is my hidden gem. It's the second most winning uncommon for the white black deck. We talked already about it, how what it does, but basically, if you are in the market for sacrificing enchantments, that's a great enchantment to sacrifice. So Princess Takes Flight, unsurprisingly, is a bunch of good cards in the white black. What is nice about it so far is that it's still taken slightly low. And I think it shouldn't, but it still is. So make sure that you abuse that while you can. It's a hidden gem because its ALSA is higher than 4, when some other much lower win rate uncommons have an ALSA of 2 or 3. How do you time a Duck Sausage? You can do it anytime after the chapter 2 triggered, really, because you want to get the value from the chapter 2. So on turn 1, you play it, you exile target creature. Turn 2, chapter 2 triggers, you give the +2/+2 and flying. And then after it gives flying, you can just straight sacrifice it. But if you don't have anything to sacrifice it, you can still put manual control, and you can still make sure that you draw on turn 3, because the chapter 3 will trigger in the main phase. So after the draw, if you draw something with bargain, you still have a time window to sacrifice Princess Take Flight at that stage. And then the chapter 3 will not trigger, and that's what you want to make sure that happens. In terms of a trap, I selected Ashiok's Reaper, 4 mana for a 3/3. Whenever an enchantment you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, draw a card. It has 49.9% win rate, and it looks like a card that would fit in this enchantments go to the graveyard kind of deck. But it doesn't have the numbers, so I think it's just too clunky. If you are in a situation when you can sacrifice a lot of things, probably it will die. If you are in a situation when it does nothing, it will probably live as a hill giant, and you will not feel great about those times. So I think that the downside of the card is just too high to warrant the upside. And this is the kind of a card that does promise a lot of card draw, and in the end delivers very little of it. So I would avoid that card, even in white-black, not to mention any other archetypes when it's even worse numbers. Right, Boros. We're finally at the archetype that is super strong. And best common is Torch the Tower at 61.3. We talked about this card in the best commons altogether. Best common in red. So no surprise that it is the strongest common in the white-red, because red is a stronger color than white, it seems. The hidden at 61.3% game in hand win rate, just for those that listen. Hopeful Vigil is my hidden gem, because that card still goes too late. 60.8% win rate for a common is a really high number. Play this card, don't ignore it. It's not only good in the black-white sacrifice enchantment thing, it's a great target for Torch the Tower to be sacrificed while you keeping up tempo with attacking. So that's like a great combination. Phenomenal. A slight trap for this archetype that I notice people are playing quite a lot and is taken quite highly is Frantic Firebolt, a 3 mana instant. It deals X damage to target creature, where X is 2 plus the number of cards in your graveyard that are instant cards and sorcery cards and or have adventure. I'm pretty sure that there's going to be some fringe fraction of Boros decks that have a lot of instants and adventure creatures that where it's going to be slightly better. But as it is, it's probably overplayed in this color combination. Only 54% win rate, so be careful about when to play this card. Key uncommons in white-red, and number 1 best uncommon, Imodane's Recruiter, 67.5% win rate. This is the level of really, really, really strong rares, like bomb level rares. Imodane's Recruiter, 2 and a red for a human knight. It's a 2/2 for 3 mana, so nothing great. But when it enters the battlefield, creatures you control get +1/+0 and haste until end of turn. And it has an adventure, Train Troops, 4 and a white for a sorcery, create 2 white knight creature tokens with vigilance. So you can play it for 3 as a sort of 3/2 haste creature that also pumps the rest of your team. Very good when you have it late in the game because you might have a broad board and you pump all the teams, so it becomes like a 3 mana 7 power or something. But if you have 8 mana, you can also cast the adventure spell, cast Immodate Recruiter, and all of a sudden you have 9 attacking hasty power, which is just phenomenal. It will not happen frequently because 8 mana is a lot, but it will happen sometimes. It has it in its range. This card will generate lethal damage very frequently, and you should pick it extremely highly. It is also great not only in decks that are white-red, it's also great in every single red combination. You will see that card time and time again in this presentation. Twisted Fealty is the hidden gem because it has a really high alsa, so it goes quite late in the draft, and it's good in a deck that does not necessarily have sacrifice outlets. So don't sleep on Twisted Fealty. I think that this card is good in just any red archetype. This is the steel card for the set, so in case you missed the first half, it looks really strong. The creation of that wicked roll makes it sort of like steal something, deal 2 damage, which is just good. Trap for white red, Cursed Courtier. 3 mana, 3/3 lifelinker, ETBs with a cursed roll attached to it. It's just that white red does not do enough roll things to make it good. It doesn't have enough sacrifice enchantment synergies to make it good. The lifelink is not that important for it. It's okay, but it's not that important. So I would avoid this card for white red. Still has a 55% win rate. So if you think about it, it's slightly worse than Picklock Prankster, which was a key uncommon hidden gem for Azorius. So it's not completely bad, but it just reflects how strong Boros is, and you can do better than Cursed Courtier in your deck. Let's move to white-green. And the key commons, we have Hopeful Vigil again, 58.4% win rate. Great. Hidden Gem, I select Archon's Glory. It does particularly well in this archetype with 57.5 win rate. This is the +2/+2 trick that can give flying and lifelink until end of turn if you bargain it. And I think it's particularly good because white-green might have a tendency of board stalling and might have a tendency of playing Hamlet Gluttons. So combining those two things together, Archon Glory giving your 6/6 Trampler +2/+2 flying and lifelink is a good choice. A trap is Return from the Wilds. It has low numbers in white-green particularly, mainly because I think that this is not big mana value deck like some other green decks are, where Return from the Wilds is actually not bad. In this deck, you don't want to be ramping, you don't want to be generating trinket artifacts. You're more interested in clean aggro kind of plan with maybe some enchantment synergies. So Return from the Wilds does not play into that. Only 52.4 win rate. Yeah, be careful of playing this card at white-green. Unless you have like a 4 Hamlet Glutton package. Oh yeah, of course. Or unless you are doing proper splashes in your white-green deck. Key uncommons for white-green. The Princess Takes Flight, 60.6% win rate. No explanation needed, just a very good card. Hidden Gem I selected is Shrouded Shepherd, 1 and a white for a 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, target creature you control gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So it's a really strong ability because it sort of gives it haste because you can give it to something else and it can attack instantly. So a strong card on the face value. And if you are capable of splashing some black, you can really go to town and you can. I had people concede from the Cleave Shadows, the sorcery part of it, which is colorless and a black creatures your opponents control get -1/-1 till the end of turn. When you manage to get like 2-3 creatures with it, it just feels oppressive. Also, because most likely you also created a situation where you can jam slam your creatures into opponent because his creatures just became that smaller this turn. 59.3 And I don't know how much of it is even with a splash that can be played, and how much of it is just playing it on a face value. And the trap that I noticed is Discerning Financier. 2 and a white for a 2/3 at the beginning of your upkeep. If an opponent controls more lands than you, create a treasure token, and you can pay 3 mana and exchange treasure with them, and you draw a card. I was quite up on the card, but maybe in some kind of celebrate deck, but it seems it's just not good enough. It's just not fast enough. It doesn't do what you want. Let's move to the non-white archetypes. We got blue-black, Demir. Key commons, best common is Candy Grapple, 60.3. That's nothing surprising. It's a very, very good removal spell. What I found interesting was Sweet Tooth Witch, which you would think is a secret green-black card, but it has a really strong numbers in Dimir as well. 3 mana for a 3/2. When it ETBs, make a food, and you can pay 2, sacrifice a food, target player loses 2 life. And it has 59.3% win rate in this archetype. And I'm wondering why, because I don't think you're going to go all in into food synergies. So I think that just 3 mana 3/2 that makes a food is good enough for you, because the witch can trade on board, the food pads your life very neatly, and you can take over the game later with some of your small flyers while racing efficiently because of the food that the witch generated. The trap that I selected is Obira's Attendance. It's a 5 mana 3/4 with flying, but it has also an instant adventure. Target creature gets -4/-0 until end of turn. Only 52.5% win rate. And I was hoping for a bit more for that card. I thought, maybe this little adventure instant thing will push it through so that the 5 mana 3/4 flyer is going to be good in this format. It doesn't look so, especially that it's a fairy that is not particularly good in the fairy archetype. Int 20H says that maybe the witch is the last couple of points of damage that the blue-black can deal in a game. Yeah, there is definitely that. It also doesn't have that many ways of generating bargain fodder, which might be important that the Sweet Tooth Witch does it. And especially there's a couple of like half decent bargain spells. So Sweet Tooth Witch is generally a very good card that people still undervalue. But Obira Attendance, on the other hand, looks like pretty bad. Key uncommons, the Witch's Vanity is number 1, 60.5% win rate. It generates a lot of cardboard for 2 mana. It can kill something really good. Again, if blue-black is struggling with making bargain things, then Witch's Vanity is just excellent for that. Hidden Gem, again, Picklock Prankster, a bit more less surprising here than in Azorius, because here you will naturally have a bunch of fairies, which will let you use that mill spell more efficiently because you will not miss every single time. The trap that I noticed is Back for Seconds, and this is a trap in many archetypes, so I don't know what to think about it, because the card looks really strong. It's a 3 mana sorcery with bargain. You get up to 2 target creature cards from the graveyard to your hand, and if you bargained it, you can put one of those with mana value 4 or less into the battlefield instead of putting it in your hand. And it has low numbers in almost every archetype that I looked through. I could have put it as a trap in most of the archetypes because it's picked highly. So I don't know what's wrong with there. Is the card just poor? It doesn't seem to me that it's absolutely poor, especially when you see how good some of the other cards can be. I think it might be played too frequently in decks that have low creature count, because there's some enchantment creature, there's a bunch of spells, blah, blah, blah. But maybe there's also some bad play patterns with this card, because people are trying to get like full value out of it and just like don't want to just play it as a good old 2-for-1. It may be also that the 4 mana drop slot is not impressive, and people try to revive those 4 mana creatures too frequently and maybe play them too frequently when they play Back for Seconds to get max value, while you should probably have a mana curve that is more likely 1, 2, 3, 5 drop, 6 drop, and skip the 4 casting cost creatures. But I don't know. I guess we'll have to see how it develops as the season progresses. And I think that it might rise as a much better card in sort of 5-color concoctions. And when you can get like super valuable creatures and cast them from the splashes, and then back for seconds will be returning like valuable targets from the battlefield. Blue red, the key commons, Towards the Tower, we already talked about it, 60.8% win rate, obviously good. But what is also good is Spell Stutter with 59.3. That's an impressive win rate for that card. Red blue wants to have a cheap interaction, and this is the perfect couple for that. Spell Stutter, the counter spell unless opponent pays 2, unless you control some fairies, which make that number higher by 1 for each fairy you control. Mocking Sprite is the trap that I selected because it looks like you want to play it in the spells deck, and blue-red is the spells deck, but it only has 54% win rate. It's a 3-mana flyer that's 2/1, and instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. The problem with that is the 1 toughness. It dies to Rat Out, it dies to Flick a Coin. All those cards are played frequently, and you just pump 3 mana into something that maybe will become a mana dork in the future turns, only to give opponent the opportunity of trading 3 mana that you spend for 1 mana that they spent, or trading 3 mana that you spent for their 3 mana plus a card plus a treasure token. So being susceptible to those 2 removal pieces is going to drag it down, I think. And the ability is not that great because you're not going to be cascading like dozens of spells every turn. So you might get a slight discount here and there, but no much than that. I would pretty much avoid that card if I can. Key uncommons for the blue-red. Hatching Plants, we already mentioned. If you sacrifice it, you draw 3 cards, but it doesn't do anything apart from that. I assume that you play it in versions that have enough bargaining capacity. And Hatching Plant is both one of the unique bargain targets in blue, and also it is one of the things that you are most happy to bargain, even if the bargaining of the spell doesn't give you that much of the value drawing 3 cards does. Hidden Gem I select. Oh yeah, Hatching Plant has 60.7% win rate. Hidden Gem I selected is Frolicking Familiar. That's a 2 and a blue for a 2/2 flyer with whenever you cast instant or sorcery spell, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Keep in mind, it's not prowess for some reason. It only does it for instant and sorceries rather than a non-creature spell. Dylan R, how is that hidden? It just has high alsa, so it goes later in the draft, which means that people are not high on it as they probably should be. It has an instant adventure for red, Blow of Steam, and it deals 1 damage to any target. Yet another way of punishing those X1s, so another nail in the coffin of the Mocking Sprite, in my opinion. A trap, Chancellor of Tales, 3 and a blue for a 2/3 flying fairy advisor. Whenever you cast an adventure spell, you may copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy. 51.9% win rate is very low, even for the blue-red, which is not like the highest win rate archetype. Just, it's not Lucky Clover. Attaching Lucky Clover to a 2/3 flyer is, I guess, just not enough, especially that the adventure spells in this format are by design a bit weaker. That's what the design team was talking about, that they want to make sure that the main piece of value in an adventure spell is the creature, not the spell, because they wanted to make sure that you can play those multicolor adventure creatures in decks that are slightly off color because they should be good on their own. Lakshmana, we have talked about the highest win rate archetypes. I'm going to come back to it after the seminar so you can have a look. Blue-green, the key commons. Unsurprisingly, Hamlet Glutton is the top common for the blue-green. 58.3% is really solid. What I noticed is the hidden gem for the archetype is the Into the Fey Court. I already said it's the top winning blue common. The 5 mana draw 3 and make a 1/1 fairy that can block only other flying creatures. 57.2. And I think that you should definitely start playing this card in blue-green decks more frequently. It looks like it has good synergy being 5 mana value. So you can cast it for cheap with the Signpost Uncommon, or you can get some bonuses for one of the several cards that use the 5 casting cost synergies. And solid numbers, so I think that you should want to play 1 copy. Who knows, maybe even 2. and you should be able to get them because they go quite late still. A trap, again, Mocking Sprite, just not good enough. 53% win rate is pretty low. Key uncommons for the archetype. Tough Cookie, 61% win rate. That card is just great on pure rate. As you can see, it doesn't even need other food synergies. It has self-contained synergy by generating that one extra food when it ETBs that you can later convert into a 4/4 artifact. Hidden gem that I selected is Royal Treatment. 60% almost win rate for a combat trick that gives hexproof and +1/+1 is a great cost for that card. The fact that it only costs 1 mana is absolutely important for it. And the trap for blue-green is Chancellor of Tales yet again, 51.2% win rate. Those 4 mana things are just not aligning very well with this format. Just not enough value that you can generate. The creature is too fragile. You can kill it for 1 mana and bargain with Torch the Tower. So you probably don't want to play it in your deck because you will not be able to accrue the value instantly, or rarely you will be able to do it because you need to have 6-7 mana to start doing it. Just not worth playing it because in the end you're left with like a 2/3 flyer, which is just underrated for that. So we can move on to black-red, and here the best common is, surprise, surprise, Candy Grapple. Actually, it is a bit of a surprise because it's not Torch the Tower, which is a new thing for red decks in this format. 60.9% win rate, and also Torch the Tower is not even the second most powerful common according to the 17 lands game and hand win rate, because it's Flick a Coin with 60.8, and that card is still being taken quite late, so we can start picking them, and it looks really strong and powerful. On the other hand, a trap is Frantic Firebolt with only 54.5% win rate. Again, not a card for those type of decks. I think that you want to be a bit heavier on the creatures in black and red, so Frantic Firebolt will too frequently be just like 3 mana, deal 2 damage, which is just not good enough. In terms of the uncommons, Imodane's Recruiter, despite of it being white-red, is still good enough in black-red to be at 64.7. You know, when you have a bunch of rats flying around, giving that +1/+1 and haste is just good enough, and it's not that difficult to even have a treasure or something to cast the adventure side of Imodane's Recruiter. Hidden gem for the archetype is Twisted Fealty. The threaten effect, the act of treason effect, is, as I said, really good in almost every red archetype, which makes me think it's just good on its face value rather than needing the sacrifice synergy with it. I think Funderwunk has a good point that Flick a Coin is a perfect way of making that treasure to make Imodane's Recruiter, and that's within the versatility that that card offers. Not only being able to kill something, but also being able to go face, being able to create a treasure token, draw a card. So you do like a lot of small things, sort of like a golden egg almost type of card. The trap for this archetype, Fairy Fencing, that card is picked very, very highly, but is just not good enough when you don't have fairies. And in black-red, very frequently, you will not have any fairies. So it will be just like a black X, give something -X, which is not enough. What makes this card good is that when you have a fairy, it's 1 black to give something -3/-3, which is a phenomenal rate for a removal spell. If you don't have that extra rate, it becomes mediocre. And 55.5% win rate in black-red that has a very high win rate is just not enough. Black-green key commons, and the best common for black-green, when you think about black-green, you think, that's some sort of a food deck. But actually, the top common is, the top common that has a huge sample size is Hopeless Nightmare with 60.6. And I was a bit surprised by that. I know that Hopeless Nightmare is a good card, but I was expecting some food synergistic cards to be the best cards in black-green. But then I thought about it, and I played a lot with black-green so far. And one of the problems I have is opponents having too many resources can just outvalue you at certain stage. And I think Hopeless Nightmare is a good way of dealing with it. First of all, you create a very cheap bargain trinket. You get rid of one of their cards, you do a bit of damage, and then later you can start playing your food synergies and play around with those, while your opponent starts with one card fewer, and you have that bargaining card that you can use for Agatha's Champion or for Hamlet Glutton later in the game without interrupting your curve, and also without having to sacrifice a food that you would rather use to shoot your opponent in the face for 2 with your Sweet Tooth Witch. But actually, the top common for Black-Green is Leaping Ambush with 60.7, although it did come with a small sample size, so I moved it from best common into the hidden gem territory. Again, this card looks surprisingly good, but then when I thought about it, how often I could have made a good use of it in my Black-Green deck, I thought, very often this would be a winning kind of card, because I have a couple of problems, and one of them includes not having a good reach creature. So killing a flyer is a pretty useful ability, but also killing something big when you're racing is pretty neat. And as for the trap, Warehouse Tabby, it is picked by people reasonably highly, and win rate of only 53.6 in this archetype is just not good enough. So avoid playing Tabby. You just don't have enough enchantments sacrifice theme in order for the card to be good. And also, going wide with rats is not exactly your plan, so card just doesn't fit with what this archetype is doing at all. In terms of Black-Green key uncommons, Gingerbread Hunter is one of the strongest uncommons in the whole set, and obviously here is its strongest home because it is a Black-Green card. So if you don't know, for 5 mana, it's a 5/5 that makes a food token. Excellent. You want to make those. You want big creatures as well. And it has a puny snack, 3 mana instant that adventure. Target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. It's slightly overcosted because it's an adventure, but it's still very powerful. And the fact that it's on instant is doubly important. So a great card, and makes Gingerbread Hunter having 64.3% win rate, which is really, really high. For the hidden gem, I selected Up the Beanstalk, partially because it still goes relatively late in the draft, partially because it maybe won't be obvious that it goes into this deck, because obviously Wizards have announced that blue-green is the archetype that has the 5 mana value or more synergy. This is the enchantment that ETBs draws a card, and whenever you cast a spell with mana value 5 or greater, you draw a card. But actually, it's very good in Black-Green because you have things like Gingerbread Hunter that you want to be playing anyway. You have things like Agatha's Champion that you're going to be wanting to play anyway. And you have a couple of other things like the Black Removal for 5 mana that can trigger it. And it's pretty successful. I've been playing this card in my decks that are not blue-green with quite a lot of success. Here it has 61% win rate, which is excellent. So you should be aiming at playing it in the main deck, at least in some of the Black-Green decks when you have like 4 or 5 mana things. And the trap, again, back for seconds with 54.3 win rate, despite being picked quite highly, holds 10 percentage points below Gingerbread Hunter. So think about it. Gruul, key commons, Torture Tower, surprise, surprise, 61.2% win rate. The card is just great in every deck that it's in. Hidden Gem was a bit surprising to me. It's Titanic Growth, 2 mana for target creature gets +4/+4 until end of turn at instant speed. It is quite strong in this archetype. I think that there is a bunch of double strike synergies. There is a bunch of trampling creatures. This will let you push some damage through. It looks pretty solid, and it has good numbers despite small sample size, but I think that you should at least try to give it a try. Trap, Beanstalk Worm, 5 mana for a 5/4 with reach, and it has Plant Beans Adventure. That's 2 mana. You may play additional land this turn. 54% win rate, just not good enough. Just is not powerful enough creature. The 5/4 for 5 is not good enough. You want something more from your card. Key uncommons for the color combination, and yet again, despite being red-white, we have Imodane's Recruiter, 62.7. Card is still excellent, and as I said, very easy to splash. Key uncommons. The hidden gem I selected is Picnic Ruiner because it goes slightly later than other cards still. So I would say don't sleep on this card. It's very powerful. It's a 2-mana 2/2. When it attacks, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, it gains double strike until end of turn. So very frequently it will be a 2/2 double striker quite early. And it also has stolen goodies, adventure at sorcery, and you can distribute 3+1/+1 counters among any number of target creatures you control, which is great. If you draw it late, you can just make something into a 4-power creature so that this will get double strike. You can distribute the tokens in such a way that will make combat math favorable for you. It's a really powerful thing. I'm pretty sure that in some decks you can play it just for the adventure side and maybe, opportunistically cast it as a creature. But in red-green, you will be able to cast both sides, which is great. Up the Beanstalk, from being a hidden gem in Golgari, dropped down to being a trap in Gruul. I still think that there are Gruul decks when you can play Up the Beanstalk successfully, but average is 55%, which is below what you would expect from uncommon in this color pair. It's still not terrible, and I'm pretty sure it can increase as the format progresses when people select the decks that they play the card in more cautiously. But for now, just be careful of playing it and think twice about it, because as far as Golgari having a game plan where you want to accrue value and you have that later game, Gruul might be interested in closing the games quickly, so you don't want to be dirtling by casting 5 drops and drawing cards. You want to be casting spells that shorten the game, and Up the Beanstalk is not one of those cards because you need to skip like a 2-drop or play a 2-drop on turn 4 together with it in order to warrant playing it. So yeah. Okay, well, that's it for the 2-color archetypes, and we have our last section, which will be short, but hopefully the most informative, actually. And it's about openness. And every single format at the beginning, I look at the openness of each color combination. And how I defined openness, because that's something I calculate from the data that's available on 17 lands, is how many cards with game in hand win rate of over 56%, because 56% is the average win rate of the 17 land users, will you see per pod on average. So here are the numbers, and the order of the colors on the graph is the same as the order of color pairs by their win rate. So Boros is the most winning deck, Azorius is the least winning deck. So you see that in an average pod, you will see 54 good Boros cards. You will see 59 good Rakdos cards. You will see 52 good Golgari cards. And these 3 color combinations are the most open ones. That's partially because, of course, I define openness as seeing good cards, and good archetypes will have more good cards. Therefore, you will see more cards. But it's not only that. As you will see, there is a bit more to it. And you shouldn't be treating it that, oh, well, this clearly is a busted thing because I see so many good cards. Some of those cards are good because I defined good as being over 56%. And some of those cards are not exactly that great, but their win rates are going to be dragged up by the fact that other cards in Boros and Ragnos are super good. And these mediocre cards tag along and piggyback right on the shoulders of the really good cards. But yeah, Boros, Ragnos, and Golgari are the most open color combinations. Then we have Gruul and Izzet, where you will see an average of 42, 43 cards per pod. But there's a big difference that Gruul wins much more than Izzet does, and we're going to come back to it in a second. And then we have 5 color combinations where you see roughly between 25 and less cards per pod on average. So these colors are not by default opened. So Selesnya, 22 good cards per archetype, and despite it, Selesnya has a decent win rate, which I still don't know how to interpret it, but I'll guess maybe hopefully it will hit me at some stage of the format. Demir, 27, Orzhov, 21, Simic around 27, and Azorius around 14, so that the fewest. And as you can see, there is a pretty good correspondence between win rate, because the order is of the win rate, and openness, with top color combinations per win rate being the most open, bottom color combinations in terms of win rate are less open. And here I have it plotted against the win rate. So here we have the win rate on the axis between 50 and 60% for the archetype. And here we have number of cards seen per pod on average, like from the 13.5 for Azorius to around 60 for Rakdos. As you can see, if you make a trend line, it's got a pretty good fit. So we see a linear increase of win rate with more open cards per archetype. But I want to focus on these two, which are Izzet and Gruul. So Izzet is here. Oh wait, so that's not Gruul. It's Izzet and Selesnya, I think. Is it? Izzet and Selesnya. So Izzet is pretty open. You see 40-something good Izzet cards per pod, but the win rate is not. The win rate is below 55%. When, if you think, on this line, it could have been easily somewhere here at 57% win rate, because it's open enough that the trend line would suggest it should be somewhere here. What does it mean to me? And it can mean a couple of things, but one of the hypotheses I have is that Izzet is open and can be better, but people are building it not optimally. And because of that, despite seeing good Izzet card, they draft bad Izzet decks, and that costs them around 2.5 percentage points win rate. So I would expect that the more innovation people put into how to build Izzet piles, and the more people update their pick orders by, for example, picking Flick the Coin a bit earlier, we might see that Izzet is going to improve over time and have a higher win rate. That's my prediction for that. On the other hand, here we have, we forgot what we have here, 55 and 20. 55 and 22. Well, that is Selesnya, isn't it? So high win rate for Selesnya, but very unopen. And I don't know how to interpret that result, because it means, it can mean maybe that synergistic interactions between cards are better than the actual individual card win rates. So, Lakshmana, definitely there can be an issue of complexity of play that makes people lose. But the point is that I checked the win rates for those cards, and the win rates of the cards are quite clear. If people would have played only the good cards, they would have had a win rate close to the win rate of the individual good cards. But they don't, which means that they probably play the bad cards too. And that will lower the win rate despite having access to good cards. So yeah, I still don't know how to explain the fact that the color is not open and still wins. Of course, part of the explanation may be slight variance. Maybe Selesnya will drop to 53. Yeah, I would be careful with Selesnya decks, because there is something wrong with it. And one of the possibilities, that is quite a large possibility, would be that Selesnya is overperforming currently. Okay, but in general, the openness corresponds pretty well with the win rate, and the most open colors are the ones that are winning, which in part is an artifact for how the metric is being built, but I still didn't figure out a way of depicting it in a better way. I played with a couple of other options. It can be that Gwyn people who draft Selesnya are particularly good and only do it when it's very open and there is a higher win rate, because they pick the right pods. And it could be something to do with the bombs that will disproportionately affect the win rate. And maybe you go Selesnya when you have a bunch of white and green bombs, and white and green do have powerful bombs in that color. But okay, that's it, what I prepared for this episode. So thank you very much for joining me in the chat. I would like to acknowledge the 17 Lands team, because they work extremely hard, especially when the new set is being released, because they have to figure out all the small teething errors that come with the release of the new set. So thanks to especially Ale Baldini and Viral Misnomer. And I would like to thank Fake Jake Brown, who is constant rock I can lean on, and I do lean on quite a lot. So thank you, Jake Brown, for helping me with the podcast version of it. While we're at the podcast version of it, I would like to thank Asescu and Mana Junkie for the music I use at my intro. And I would like to thank my patrons, especially Diogo this week, who is an old friend. And I will Control-Alt-Delete my new patron. And I would like to thank MTGA Zone for trusting in my eventual resurgence as a writer for them. So thank you very much. And with that, I'll see you next week.